Good evening and welcome to Thursdays with NAMI. My name is Peg Morrison. I'll be your host for the evening. I am the Director of Programs for NAMI North Carolina. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness, North Carolina. I'm glad you're here. Thursdays with NAMI is our way of building conversations and building community around the topic of mental health. This week, we're looking at the hippopotamus in the room. Hipaa, of course, is a federal law. It's the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Hipaa includes many provisions, but tonight we're focused on that privacy angle. Dating to 1996, little background here, Hipaa mandated the creation of national standards to protect sensitive health information for you and me from being shared without our consent or knowledge. So if you're an adult, in a nutshell, your doctor cannot share your health information without your consent. But there are always exceptions. These can include situations involving mental health, mental illness, and substance use, but doctors have a fairly strict standard to meet currently. They must use their professional judgment to conclude that sharing such information is in the patient's best interests. I gotta say, since getting involved with NAMI about 10 years ago, I've heard a lot of complaining about Hipaa. Medical professionals don't like the paperwork. Who wants to fill out one more form to validate that you've seen a privacy policy? Family members feel stonewalled, especially after they bring a loved one to the hospital, they're in severe crisis. Parents are worried sick about their son or daughter and can't get any information. That would be a very helpless feeling. But what about the person getting treatment who cannot speak for themselves? Maybe they're in psychosis, they're intoxicated, whatever the reason. How do doctors know what should be shared with a concerned third party? How do they know the patient even feels safe with the person who's asking for that information? A lot of angles to consider here. So some organizations have been pushing the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to loosen up those privacy rules so that family members and loved ones can be part of the treatment team more easily. So changes have been proposed. The stated goal of these modifications is to improve healthcare access and outcomes. For example, it would be easier for me to access my own medical file online. New Hipaa would also allow doctors to share my information more easily with others, not based on professional judgment, but that stricter current standard, but more simply on a good faith belief, a little bit of a looser standard. So that's what we're delving into tonight. Should Hipaa be changed? The deadline for the public to submit comments on these proposed changes is May 6th, and you can do so online. We're going to put that link in the chat box tonight. So congratulations for being here now. We're going to look at this subject, do some research, and you can let your voice be heard. As usual, the first part of our show will be an interview with our guests. About halfway through, we'll show a video of the week, and then we'll be spending time with you, members of our virtual studio audience. We've got some wonderful experts on hand to answer your questions. And now quickly, we've got a word from our sponsors. Thursdays with NAMI is funded in part by the National, talk amongst yourselves for just a moment. The North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse Services through the Federal Community Mental Health Block Grant Fund. We do appreciate their guidance and their support. Alrighty, without further ado, I'm happy to introduce my guests. Pam Goodine is the Forsyth County Public Health Department Certified Peer Support Specialist for the Stepping Up program. She's also a trained NAMI program leader. She's the recipient of the NC Hope Peer Support Award for 2019, and she does a great job. I've worked with her for a while. Michael Gray is the Legislative and Policy Counsel at the Treatment Advocacy Center. He works towards better civil commitment laws, trying to save lives and access to mental health care for people with the most severe cases of mental illness. He trained as an attorney and earned a master's degree in urban planning from the University of Louisville. He's also friends with my good friend, Betsy Johnson, who also works at TAC. We all met through NAMI, Ohio. Gabe Howard is an award-winning podcast host, author, and speaker. He hosts a weekly Inside Mental Health podcast for Healthline Media and is author of Mental Illness as an Asshole and Other Observations. So I know you probably all have accolades that I did not include in your bios. I know you'll be forgiving and kind with that. And all righty, moving right along without further ado, we always like to know the backstory of the folks we have on the show. And why don't we go, we'll just go Pam, Michael, Gabe. Why don't you tell us your stories in a nutshell?
Okay, good evening, everyone. Peg, thank you so much for the invitation to take part in this very important discussion. And so I originally began working in this field with a focus on substance use disorder. I am a person with life lived experience of recovery from both dually diagnoses, but I did not really come to an understanding of what mental health was until I began working in the field. Even though I did receive a diagnosis of major depression, I wasn't really open to accepting that. But as I began working more and more with people, I began understanding the stigma that's associated with it and accepted the diagnosis that I had. And I began to make some changes to improve my wellness and my recovery.
All right, thank you, Pam. I'm so glad you're here.
My turn?
Yes, thank you, Michael. Sorry about that.
That's all right. So as Peg said, I'm Michael Gray. I'm Legislative and Policy Counsel at the Treatment Advocacy Center. Before coming to the Treatment Advocacy Center, I was a contract lobbyist in Kentucky, and almost all of my clients were in the mental behavioral health world. And got involved in this work. By this work, I mean advocating for better laws for mental illness treatment, because I see it as an issue of social justice and underrepresentation. People with SMI and their families and loved ones who are trying to get them help constantly, those are an underrepresented group of people. They are an exhausted group of people. They're so tired of fighting the system. And it's really for people who have a love and passion for advocacy work in the first place. It's really an all hands on deck moment in time right now, because people in all the states, including North Carolina and the federal government, want to see change. And I hope that people who do the work we do at TAC and elsewhere can be some part of that. So that's why I'm here. That's why we're here today.
Welcome, Michael. And I have to say that bookcase behind you, it could be a virtual background, but it looks real.
It's real. It's real. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, I had to confirm that. All righty, Gabe.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gabe Howard, and I live with bipolar disorder. And I started sort of this accidental career because I was diagnosed with bipolar by being committed to a psychiatric hospital, and it just I don't even know what happened. And it took 4 years from the time that I was diagnosed until I reached recovery. And I define recovery as spending more of my life just living my life than I do managing bipolar disorder. And I went through so much, and my family went through so much. And I thought to myself, all right, somebody needs to do something about it. And I sat around waiting for somebody to do something, and not a lot happened. So I thought, all right, well, the old adage goes, I'm somebody. And I just started doing stuff now. As Peg said, I host the Inside Mental Health podcast for Healthline Media, and that just allows me to interview great people to talk about all facets of mental health, mental illness, and psychology. And there's so much work to be done, and there's so many people that just deserve a voice. And I am so thankful to have one, and I'm thankful to Peg for allowing me to be here. And I look really forward to this discussion with Pamela and Michael. And that's as little words as I can possibly use. I tried.
No, that was a nutshell. That was well done.
Yes.
You did it. All right, well, on to our questions. Pam, I have to admit, I read the question I have for you just now, and I may have answered it to some extent in the intro that I gave. but we'll start with the basics. What is HIPAA? What did I miss?
Well, Peg, I think you covered it all, but I can say, before working in this field, I do recall going to take my children to their doctors and stuff and being asked to sign the HIPAA and just going on to, explain that it was the privacy, the doctor's privacy policy in which they could share information. I had no idea what they would share or who they would share it to. However, I've learned more about it, especially since I've been working in this field. And I do know that it is also the law that prevents staff from sharing information with anyone in which the persons that we are supporting does not want to share it with.
Yeah, it is. I had the same introduction to HIPAA. I just remember everyone suddenly complaining every time I went to a doctor's office. Oh, I can't believe we have to do these bloody forms. Once upon a time, there was like this golden era where there wasn't so much paperwork around healthcare, I think. Michael, Gabe, do you have follow-up comments on the simple concept, what is HIPAA, or your fond memories of a paper-free life?
Maybe you want to go first?
Sure. I never remember this paper-free life. And once again, the devil's is in the details, right? If I told this story of somebody called up my doctor and said, hey, I want to talk about Gabe's medical records. And my doctor was like, oh yeah, what do you want to know? Oh yeah, Gabe is mentally ill. And in fact, in his last appointment, he just talked about this story of these things that were going through his brain. Now, who am I talking to again? Oh, Gabe applied for a job with you? Yeah, he's nuts. Don't hire him. Bipolar is the day is long. Thanks. You would think, oh, we need HIPAA so bad. You just can't be telling people that. Now, if I told the story slightly different and I said, hey, Gabe is really, really sick. He has no idea who he is. He's in a psychiatric hospital, and I love him so much and I want to help him. I'm his mom. Sorry, we can't even tell you if he's here, and hang up on him. People would be like, oh, HIPAA's terrible. We need to get rid of it. And yeah, which version do you want? Because HIPAA can just be talked about in so many different ways. And as Peg pointed out, we're just sort of telling the privacy point. So I'm really excited to see which version of HIPAA we discuss here tonight, because it, like anything, it has pros and cons. And the pros and the cons are both equally valid. And with that, Michael, I'll pass it right over.
You've done both, just gave great perspective on it. And I know anyone who's ever been to a healthcare provider has at least had a question about the form they're signing for the first time. And then some people have had great frustration, like you said, Gabe, and Pam, of course that happens. But and I know we're focusing on the privacy rule tonight, but the context of HIPAA, like how we got here, I mean, it's the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It's health insurance. The intent was really to make sure that when people changed jobs, they could keep health insurance coverage, and in the same piece of legislation that they could not be excluded for pre-existing conditions. Now, is that the way it played out in reality? I mean, obviously not really, but that was the intent. And if you're a nerd like me and you've read the congressional floor debates over the bill, you'll see they didn't talk about privacy that much, a little bit, but not much. So, but there was some concern that with emerging technologies, think about 1996, that was on the cusp of EHR being everywhere. I mean, that was, from you look 20, 30 years later, past from now, back when I was a little kid, there was none of this stuff, and now it's everywhere, and for good reason. But it creates real risk of violating people's privacy. And prior to HIPAA,
EHR, is that electronic health record?
Yes, sorry about that. Yes. And also prior to HIPAA, I'm not trust me, I'm not defending HIPAA by any means, but prior to HIPAA, there was no federal legal guarantee that the patient could request and obtain their own medical records from a provider. So the intent was, it's the road to hell, right? I mean, it was good intentions there, but one big piece of this thing required HHS to promulgate a privacy rule. And that's where we are now. And that's where we were in 2003. There've been a bunch of updates to it. And that's how we got here, where we all have to sign this form every time we go see an ophthalmologist to get our eyeglasses updated. We got to sign this form. That's how we got here.
Exactly. Now, that's one of the changes that isn't really a part of our discussion tonight, not in our scope, but that's one that I'm kind of glad. Let the form go away. That's my 2 cents. Okay. Next one to Gabe. How has HIPAA impacted healthcare for individuals who live with mental health challenges?
So if we just look at the privacy portion, it's impacted us either positively or negatively, depending on your specific circumstances. It's so hard to like wrap your arms around it, right? See, my parents are amazing, and I love my parents. And when I get sick, I want them to not only let my parents know everything about me. I would like it if a doctor would like get in their car and drive and pick my parents up, because they're worried about me, right? And that's great if you have my parents. Now, on the other side, not everybody's parents are Gabe's parents. Some people have toxic parents or parents who trigger them or contribute to the illness. And when they get sick, they don't want their parents to know anything. And in fact, if their parents are calling, they may well be making it worse. So this makes the debate or conversation all that much, well, frankly, more difficult, because where are your parents? Do you have Gabe's parents? Do you have toxic parents? Do you have no parents? And of course, this is always framed around like parents and children, but privacy is just, it's such a difficult thing. So I don't want to get in the weeds on this. I'm interested, Peg, like, where exactly do we end up on this? Because, hey, I guess if it was up to Gabe, yeah, you can tell my parents whatever you want, but there's so many people that they don't want their parents anywhere near it.
Mhm. Yeah, comments, Mike, Pam?
I totally agree with Gabe. There are some people that are 18 years and older that choose not to have the information shared with their families, for the simple fact that the parent has been a caregiver for so long, and sometimes trauma took place within their home. And so sometimes if a parent has the information about their loved one, which is 18 years or older, I feel like it's very important that the parent or caregiver have a conversation with their adult child and ask them for permission to release information to them. But I also feel like it's very important for the parent to include their child in the conversation about the treatments that they are being received, and be prepared to listen to what their child have to say. Like I said, as a parent, I have 5 children. 4 of them are adults now. One of them is up under the age of 16, well, 18. However, my older kids, I want to know what's going on with them too. But I know, because I'm so used to taking care of them and leading and guiding them and caring for them. But now they're at the age in which they can make some decisions for themselves. And so I sit down and I have a conversation with them about things that's going on, and let them know that I care about them and have their best interests at heart, and ask them, how can I best support them? But listening to our loved ones or anyone living with serious mental health challenges is very important. That's the most important thing that we can do.
Wise words. Michael?
I tell you, I first of all, once again, you're all doing a great job answering this from different perspectives. And I'll say, I think we're going to touch on my thoughts on this exact issue a little bit later on. In the interest of time, we can punt for now. But I will say that as the title of this event implies, it is the hippopotamus in the room. It's the issue of I'm an adult and I don't want those people to have my information. Those people say our adult child is having a psychotic episode. So that is the friction, that is the cusp of the issue here. So we'll get into that later in more detail with the proposed changes, but that's all for now. It is the hippopotamus in the room.
It really is. And as I'm hearing all the different perspectives, I'm thinking of the guest that we had on this show last night, Alyssa Vine Hodge, and she talked about being hospitalized as a young adult, and so many people weren't getting any visitors. And so her family would come and visit everybody, and they'd bring everybody a Mountain Dew who wanted one. And I just thought, well, what about people maybe their families don't know where they are and they would visit if they knew, but they have no access to that information. But then I put myself in the position of the patient, and there's definitely a list of people I just, love them to bits, but I sure wouldn't want to see them if I was in that situation. So, moving right along, it is a sticky topic. This one's to you, Michael. Of all the changes proposed by DHHS, which are the most significant for folks who live with substance use and/or mental health conditions?
Right, so there's two big ones here. And for some background, and I'm sure most of you on here probably know, but as Peg said, we're within the comment period, meaning the federal government is encouraging you, the American people, to give your feedback on proposed changes to the HIPAA privacy rule. And two big ones that impact our people, meaning families who have a loved one with SMI, and also the people who are living with SMI. First, current standard in the privacy rule says that a clinician may disclose PHI, health information, to someone else about a patient if it's an exercise of their professional judgment that it's in the patient's best interest. Proposed change is that will then be called that'll then be a standard of a good faith belief. So instead of as an exercise of professional judgment that it's in the patient's best interest, it's a good faith belief on the behalf of the clinician that it's in the patient's interest. Here's the thing: is that a lower standard and could therefore facilitate better communication between families and providers when they have a loved one who's in mental illness crisis? Yes, it's a lower standard. But the reason is that the current one is so vague. Ask a healthcare provider, what does it mean in exercise your professional judgment that you're acting that's in the best interest of the patient? And, I mean, everyone have their own ideas, but general consensus is, since we don't know, we're going to err on the side of caution and not disclose information. So the vagueness of the current professional judgment standard is a real problem that this proposed change could address. That's number one. And that one's the easiest to explain because the current one is not worded very well. The current standard is not worded very well. That's number one. Number two, another part of the privacy rule allows clinicians to disclose information about a patient if there is a serious and imminent threat of harm to either the patient themselves or to others, if they don't disclose the information. That's a problem in the HIPAA privacy rule, just like it's a problem in a lot of other types of mental health laws at the state and federal level. Anytime you see the word imminent, any form or synonym of that word, it is a strict standard. It means that the threat of harm to self or others must be right here, right now. If I don't do this thing, disclose information, they're going to go harm themselves or someone else right now. That is a problem. That is a problem, because it restricts that flow of information between providers and family members. The proposed change is to replace serious and imminent with serious and reasonably foreseeable threat. Other than being a little lawyery in the way it's worded, that's pretty good. It's a little too lawyery how it's phrased, because still asking a clinician who is having a busy day and has a very tough decision to make about disclosing information or not for a patient who's not doing very well. It's better than serious and imminent, because if you stop and they have time to stop and think about it for a minute, they'll know that it's foreseeable. Okay, yes, I could foresee that there may be a threat of harm if I don't disclose information. Those are the two big changes that can really impact the people that both Treatment Advocacy Center and NAMI North Carolina deal with and care about.
Okay. And so just to give an example for the foreseeable threat, it could be maybe I have a pattern. If I go off my medication, I'll stop eating, or I'll leave home in cold conditions like every time. So then you would know, okay, this is foreseeable because that is the pattern, or
that would like? I hadn't thought about that example. That's the kind of example we hear a lot more with like involuntary commitment scenarios. But for the purpose of this privacy rule here, yes, it's that is something that's reasonably foreseeable versus imminent. I'm not sure if that's imminent. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but I would say that that's not imminent. Where it is, it could be reasonably foreseeable. Yes, great example.
Okay, okay. Gabe, Pam, any follow-up?
I don't have anything.
One of the things that I think of, so first off, I agree. Imminent is just such a ridiculous standard, just because how often is something imminent? I mean, you know, I was listening to you talk, Michael, and I think about like, my grandmother walks with a cane, and I love my grandmother. She's my favorite person. That's why I always use her in these examples, because she likes hearing her name on the Facebook. But you know, my grandmother walks with a cane. So if I place something in the middle of the hallway, she is not imminently going to fall. She's watching television. It's not until she needs to use the bathroom, which is an hour from now, that she's in danger. So to your point, Michael, she's not in imminent harm. But you are correct. Nobody would be mean enough to place something in my grandmother's path with her cane, because that would be dangerous. So in this way, I like the change. What concerns me, of course, is somebody living with bipolar disorder, or the people that I talk to. It just seems like, is it a slippery slope? And now I hate slippery slope arguments. I hate them to death. So what I kind of want to push back to you, Michael, is how does it protect the people who do have that toxic family? Because their privacy records are now under lock and key. And mom shows up, and, you know, mom seems so nice. She seems so reasonable. But once again, we know that mental illness runs in families. So when TAC and NAMI see people, it's always the scenario where there's the seriously mentally ill child and the parents that have no mental illness whatsoever. But I don't know if that's atypical, but it's also possible that mom and dad also have serious mental illness, and there's this long history of serious mental illness, and the person that's protected by that Privacy Act is desperate to stay away from mom and dad. No, it's not possible for the doctor to know any of this family history whatsoever. So the doctor is like, oh, you know, I've heard of this. I'm going to give permission because mom and dad are going to help. And then mom and dad walk through that doctor, walk past the doctor, and then just all hell breaks loose. And of course, now there's no way to put that cat back in the bag. How do we prevent against that?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, you're right that you could have a scenario where the family member has a mental illness and is causing them to behave irrationally at the time, or take it a step further, and maybe even more common. What if the parents are just bad people, bad parents, and they don't have the child's best interest for a number of reasons in mind? Here's the thing about that. We
don't like to think about, but it is possible. That's like, we never want to talk about that. But
so just like under the current rule, the big picture problem here is that this should be case by case, whether it's an exercise of professional judgment by a healthcare provider or the new standard. It still should be case by case, and it will not have perfect outcomes. It will not have perfect outcomes. All that the feds can do, all that HHS can do, and the Office of Civil Rights, which is their enforcement arm and the ones that oversee Hipaa and the privacy rule, all they can do is see if the disclosure was appropriate. Let me rephrase that. All they should do is see if the disclosure was appropriate. And so if a doctor had under the new standard a good faith belief they're acting in the patient's best interest when they disclose the information to mom and dad in that scenario, the doctor should not be worried about liability. They probably will continue to be, because just like the last 18 years, their employers scare the heck out of them over this stuff and make them afraid to disclose, even when they know it's in the patient's best interest, even when they have that good faith belief. So it should be case by case. And and I'm sure you have, I bet everyone on this panel has talked to healthcare providers who have made a decision under the current privacy rule to disclose information in a scenario such as that. They agonize over it, and they realize, well, it says I can disclose under these circumstances, and I really feel like this case is in one of those circumstances. So that's the bottom line. HIPAA is such a broad, big picture of federal law. The privacy rules, broad, big picture of federal regulation. And then you've got this one family, and whether or not those parents have their adult son, daughter's best interest at heart. That's a tough decision for a clinician to make. And I keep saying doctor, it can be any healthcare provider. And that's a tough decision, but that's the most important thing here is that we should be, I'm not a provider, healthcare providers should be using the privacy rule case by case, common sense kind of a way. And hopefully these changes will move that along, but they can already be doing that, using it in a case by case, common sense kind of way. And I know that sounds kind of pie in the sky, but that's how this should work. And that's how it does work when you talk to providers who understand the privacy rule and really care about their patients. So that situation is avoidable, but there's going to be under the old standard and under the new proposed changes, there's going to be cases, Gabe, where it's not a good scenario and the clinician makes a mistake by disclosing.
We've got some comments in the chat box. When you're a parent and call 911, you have to go and get them. You want to get your child the help they need when they have anosognosia. It's a real problem. They think they are the Archangel Michael. So sometimes it's very hard to get someone help when they don't think they need it or have a very strong belief the other way. Question from Diane, can we revoke the release as well, the release of information form? HIPAA can also be overridden when there is a duty to warn, she commented. Thank you for that. I believe the HIPAA release form can be revoked at any time. I'm sure that has to be the case, right?
I'm wondering if she might mean revoking, kind of withdrawing whatever information you've shared. If it's verbal, that's not going to happen. But if you have some sort of physical sharing of information, electronic, she may mean that. But yeah, you can. I mean, I'm not sure how it pertains to that. I think I'm probably, it's not her fault. I'm missing the question here. Anyone else have?
Well, one of the things that I think about, if I may, Peg, is, so let's say that the doctor, so I'm going to use myself as an example. I'm my favorite example. So I am now in the psychiatric hospital, and the doctor has decided to tell my parents that I'm there, even though currently that's a violation of HIPAA. And let's go with the new rules. So now the doctor looks at it, like you said, case by case, and decides to tell my parents that I am there. My parents come in, I'm desperately trying not to say shit show. It's awful, and it doesn't work out. Can it be revoked then? Because I feel like I know the answer to this question, but I want to pose it to you, Michael. So it didn't work out. My parents are now there. Everything bad happened. Can the doctor remove my parents and then stop giving them information?
Yes, well, because again, if I'm understanding that right, and I have to really emphasize, I'm not a healthcare provider. I mean, you all know that, but for anyone who's just starting to listen in or something, I'm really not. But yes, because that disclosure. So is it like a verbal conversation? He's having a conversation with your parents and then decides this needs to stop.
Yeah. So under the new proposed rules, again, if I understand them correctly, I have not signed a HIPAA release, but the doctor has determined that it would be in my best interest for my parents to know that I'm here and be called down. So the doctor calls my parents and says, Mr. and Mrs. Gabe's parents, your son is in the psychiatric hospital. He's been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. We want you to come here. My parents immediately come there. All kinds of bad things happen. And the doctor then realizes the doctor made a mistake, should not have called my parents. Does the doctor now have the ability to say, hey, go away, you're not allowed here anymore?
Okay, I want to comment. There's a note in the chat box from our awesome psychiatric nurse, Gail Pruitt. The health team, including nurses, can remove parents or anyone who is distressing the person.
Yeah, I'm so glad she said that, because I was thinking, I was kind of give you a common sense answer, because you said she's an actual psychiatric nurse. That's who knows the answer to that, because common sense tells me that's more of a hospital, that's a facility security issue that transcends the HIPAA privacy rule. It's no longer about sharing information. It's about these people need to go. The situation's out of hand, or will soon become out of hand. That's about the hospital, the facility's security. And as she's saying, I defer to the nurse on that one.
Okay, now let's, thank you so much both to Michael and Gail. Now let's back it up and put it in the realm of again, under the new proposed rules, exact same scenario. The doctor explains it to my parents and then realizes at some point in giving information that they made a mistake. I think the concern in the community is that once the doctor starts giving information, that the doctor will now be required to give information forever. So if my treatment plan changes, if I come to the hospital next time, if I get diagnosed with a UTI, just whatever, that even though the doctor now realizes that Gabe and his parents are not a good match, because they disclosed once, when my mom calls up and says, did anything happen today? Will the doctor be empowered to say, you know what, I've changed my mind and I don't want to tell you anymore? Or will my mom be able to say, no, you called me yesterday with an update. You're now required to give me an update forever.
No,
Maybe the
HIPAA
doctor
doesn't-
does not take that call.
Yeah, well, and HIPAA doesn't. The privacy rule won't lock a provider into that. No, I mean
That's
it
the
is- it
question
doesn't-
that I have. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not a. That would be like if that were the case, that'd be like a true slippery slope. Like, oh, I've started going down this hill, no, I can't come back. No, it would. No, I wouldn't lock them into that.
The reason that I asked the question is because, again, let's think like a lawyer, Michael, and I enjoy doing this for sport, even though I have no
Says to the
training.
lawyer.
Yeah, I enjoy doing this for fun, even though I have no training. One of the things that I think about is under the new proposed law, and I genuinely don't know the answer. This is what people in my community are worried about. So day one, the doctor decides under the new laws that they are allowed to tell my parents. So they give my parents information. And then on day two, the doctor realizes, okay, this wasn't helpful. And that's a reasonable outcome. The doctor did it in order to help me, realizes that it was not helpful. And now my mom is calling to get additional information. And the doctor, like you said, Peg, doesn't take the call. Will my parents, again, this is risk management, now have a complaint? The doctor called me yesterday, worried me, told me my son was in danger, and now won't take my call, won't give me information, and told me that I can't have any information. Now is my mom in a position that she can, I don't want to say sue because that's way too big of a legal quagmire, but we all know that turning off the faucet on somebody is problematic. And especially a worried parent, the doctor deciding, hey, you can't know anymore because that's in Gabe's best interest. Isn't mom going to be upset?
I'm confused though, because doctors, if they're good at one thing, it's they're good at having gatekeepers and not answering questions. I mean, have you ever
Which is why
tried to
my
get
mom called a
information?
lawyer.
There are no grounds for suit in that situation. She's not entitled
Right.
to your health information.
Well, but isn't she? She was given my health information yesterday.
And no, so a disclosure of information. I'll give you the HIPAA answer.
Yes, please.
And I'm not a practicing litigator, so I can't tell you how that would. Well, I mean, I guess I could talk generally about whether or not there's like a breach of any duty of care or malpractice, which I don't think there would be. But certainly as far as HIPAA goes, no, it's a disclosure is just the disclosure. It's not, again, it doesn't lock the provider into any either to an obligation to share, and it would not give the mom in that scenario would not give the mom any guarantee of getting future information. And I think, again, as Peg pointed out, I think she's spot on, and this is anecdotal based on the doctors I know, that would the doctor did this once and said whether or not the doc thought that it was a mistake to disclose the information, or maybe to disclose to this particular parent, or whatever the reason, I don't think the parent will be able to get them on the phone again. I just don't see that. Now, that would be case specific, doctor by doctor, but I bet they'd have trouble ever getting them on the phone again. And if they got them on the phone, they'd have trouble ever giving them any answer again, because the doc under privacy rules has no obligation to continue sharing. And that's just the HIPAA answer. Again, I am not an expert on the duty of care for physicians, but that is standard of care, excuse me, and their duty to their patients and families. But that's the HIPAA answer.
Thank you, Michael. That's of course the concern, because I'm 100% on board
We want to go to the car wash.
with, I'm sorry. I am 100% on board, as I think any reasonable
on
and
this
caring and
webinar.
compassionate person would be, with getting people the exact help that they need. the concern is always, you know, what rights can we preserve as we get better? As things start going well, can it be revoked if it never existed? And I know we don't have time to go into all of that, but that's kind of what I was getting at with like these specific scenarios. Is the doctor able to make the determination that, okay, now mom and dad are done? Is that reasonable? Will they be able to? And it sounds like the answer is absolutely. And that of course is very encouraging for my community, because that's our big concern. What happens as we get better? Can we start taking these pieces back?
So yeah, that I'm gonna fast forward to another question I had for you, Gabe, is how do we get people on the same page? Because we've got, it seems like to me, mental health facilities and professionals use HIPAA as a shield. They use it as a wall. Like, you know, I have no obligation to talk to third parties, so I'm going to save time and not ever do that. But we know peers are better off when people around them are on board with their recovery. That's why NAMI's programs are so successful. How do we get people on the same page?
This is one of my biggest frustrations as an advocate, of course, because I do think that HIPAA is being wielded as a sword and used incorrectly. For example, if we take the current laws right now, we've made 0 changes, and my mom knows that I'm in the hospital. She knows it because she loves me and she knows where her son is. And I sent a text message right before whatever thing happened. The reasonable thing to state would be to ask me if I would sign a waiver, would be to see if I have a power of attorney, a healthcare power of attorney to do anything. But what my mom ends up getting stonewalled with is, we're not allowed to tell you HIPAA. That's not true. Nobody investigated any further, asked me to sign anything, saw if I had something on record. They just hung their hat on the word HIPAA and went away. And that's just wrong. And I see this so often that peers, people just like me who have healthcare power of attorneys that list that their mom and dad are allowed, they're not even being looked at, and I'm not in a position to argue it. Luckily, I have informed my mom that this exists, and she pulls it out of her purse and all goes well, but it's extraordinarily frustrating. So to how to get people on the same page, you know, and I'd be interested to hear what like Pamela and Michael have to say. I think that healthcare practitioners need to realize that this isn't a get out of your job free card. They have things that they can do. And I'm trying not to throw practitioners under the bus, but I've seen so many examples of them using HIPAA incorrectly. And that needs to stop, because it makes it bad for all people, healthcare and patients, healthcare providers and patients.
Comments, Pam, Michael.
But I feel wellness and recovery is possible for anyone, regardless if they have serious mental health challenges or not. At some point, we have to bring them into the conversation about things that's taking place on their lives. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of times our parents or the parents of the loved one's child ages out, and the parent is not able to get the information to continuously support that adult child. However, I feel like the conversation should take place, you know, with the child, explain to them why you would like to have this information, what information you would like to have. And most of all, let them know that you're there to support them. A lot of times this does not take place, you know, the conversations. It's all about someone else calling the shots for us. But I feel like, you know, with the population that I work with, I see myself empowering them and encouraging them. And I would love to see more people that are receiving services, you know, that have serious mental health challenges be included in conversations like this right here. A lot of times they only know what they're being told, but I like to bring them into the table and so that they can hear what's going on. They may not be able to grasp all of it at one time, but eventually they're going to gain some information from it. But our problem is we're always trying to figure out a way to fix somebody. When if we would take time to listen to them and find out what their hopes and dreams are and what they want, they're able to identify the things that would take place and help them in their recovery. And so,
Right. Pam, if I could, when you say a child ages out, that means that their
18,
information
hit
is no longer
18.
shared.
Yeah, they
with the
hit 18
parents.
years old. Yeah. You know, I have with the program that I work for with the Department of Public Health, had a call from a mother the other day to saying that her and her son wanted to be part of our program. But my supervisor had to tell her that you can be part of our program, but your son is going to have to call on his own. See, that mother and the son both had problems, but the mother took the initiative to say, hey, I'm going to call and get us some help instead of coaching her son and, you know, having him to do it himself. If he wants services, he needs to call and say, hey, I want services. So a lot of times parents have the best interest for their child, but however, that child may want to do some things in order to please their parents. But the parents got to realize that sometimes the things and the choices that they have in place and have in mind is not always best for their loved ones. And so bring them into the conversation, educate them, just like we're sitting around boards advocating and talking about changes within gaps in the system and whatever. Bring them to the table also and let them start advocating and speaking up. That will empower them so much, and you would be amazed at how well they would get and how they would start supporting other peers, being a voice for the voiceless. But we have to equip them. We have to share information with them that they may not know.
I love hearing you talk about that. That was just such an uplifting approach, and I want to thank you for that. And you're right, it's so hard for parents when suddenly the child is 18 and the doctor can't communicate. The day before that birthday, they had as much information as they wanted. A couple comments in the chat box. Very candid comment. I'm hearing the family and doctor's voice, but not the adult patient's voice. We got plenty of adult patients here on the webinar, so we'll have to work on that, I guess. Note from Diane, Gabe, excellent point. I'm not sure what point it was, but you made a lot of good ones. Comment from Gail, the psychiatric nurse. My sense is that all of these new rules will need to be tested and tried. At this point, it's a waiting game. So thank you for all of those comments. As Michael mentioned earlier, it will need to be a case-by-case basis. All right, thank you for all those comments, everyone. I guess we're well past the halfway mark of our show, which is where we normally stop the interview process. But I'm going to ask each of you to respond to this question before we transition. I'm assuming right after the show, you will go to the link and give your comments on Hippo. What will you say?
Wants to go first?
Well, it's very short. It wasn't Michael Gray's comments, but but I was part of the drafting process for Treatment Advocacy Center entering comments. And it was, I didn't, when I talked about the changes earlier to answer Peg's question about proposed changes, I don't think I opined that much, but if you couldn't tell, my employers like those two proposed changes. And personally, since you asked, Peg, I think they're great. I think that Gail in the comments is absolutely right. We're gonna have to see how it works out, but there's a pretty good chance the changes are gonna happen. But if you don't like that, let them know. Go on the link and let them know. If you do like that, that's also very helpful for a federal agency to hear they have support from the people around the country. So yeah, my answer is simple because we've already submitted comments and the changes are good, but they could go further. I'll trail off with that. They could go a lot further to do a lot more good, but this is a step in the right direction.
All right, thank you, Michael. Gabe.
One of the things that I think, so one, we absolutely need HIPAA reform in that we've left people behind and we've left the most vulnerable people behind. And that is absolutely unconscionable. What I am probably going to say, and what I always say when I talk about these things, is we do a really good job of addressing the issue that's in front of us. Okay, how are we going to solve this problem? Boom, here's how we're going to solve it. And when it comes to mental illness and especially serious mental illness, there never seems to be any understanding of, okay, once we solve the problem, then what? It's like we stop at solving the problem. Okay, we're going to fix HIPAA. Okay, well, what happens when the person with serious mental illness gets better? We're not going to worry about that. What is the fallout to the person with serious and mental? We're not going to worry about that. We're solving this problem. Do we need to look down the road and see what happens? No. Problem in front of us, resolution, done. This is problematic because while we're so quick to figure out what to do with somebody who is in crisis, who is in psychosis, who has anesthesia, etc., we're never quick to figure out when do we leave that person alone and let them live their life. We know absolutely when to get involved, but nobody is doing much research on when Gabe or the people like Gabe are well and when we need to pull back. And those are always my comments. If this works, that's wonderful. When do I get my life back? That's what people in my community want to know. When this works, let's say that it works, when are you done? There doesn't seem to ever be an end date. It's like you own me forever. And that's scary. It's scary for us.
I appreciate those comments. And as you were talking about the desire for a one-off solution, it struck me that parallels recovery. I always want a one-off solution. Recovery is just a long, hard slog. It's every day, all day. So thank you for your thoughts. Pam.
So when I received the invitation to take part in this discussion, I had the opportunity to reach out to many, many families, as well as peers, people that are receiving services, because I wanted to know how did they feel about it. You know, I wanted to know, did they know changes was about to take place with the Hippo? A lot of people did not even know, and it was like, what? I need to read about that. So I provided them with the information. It's so important to educate the community, educate those people that are receiving services. And, you know, I have empathy with all the different perspectives that I have heard. Some people, they want their parents to know what's going on, but they may not want their siblings to know what's going on. Some of them may have concerns about collaborating with their physical health doctor and their mental health doctor. You know, they don't know what information is going to be shared. So it's so important that we talk to whomever the individual is and say, hey, such and such is requesting information about you. What would you like shared? That person deserves the right to know exactly what information is being shared, and also to use their voice to say what information they do not want shared. But again, it's so important to bring the person that is receiving, that these changes are going to affect, to the table, into the conversation. Hear what they have to say. You know, I learned from experiences, and I believe our world does too. We're always looking for a way to better or improve things. And so this being more than likely, we're going to affect, you know, the changes possibly will be approved. However, we have a voice, and we can always contact our legislators or whomever and speak up about these changes. You know, nothing about us without us.
That's an excellent point. And they did extend the deadline. They pushed it back to May 6th because they wanted more input. So if you have feelings about this issue now that you've learned about it, go ahead and let them know. We'll put that link in the chat box again. I also want to mention this is a good time to talk about PADS, Psychiatric Advanced Directives, a nice way to help yourself avoid these situations of who do I want to talk to and who I don't, or who speaks for me when I'm not speaking very well for myself, is to lay it out in advance with a Psychiatric Advanced Directive. And our policy director, Ashish George, can help you create your own PAD. If you check us out online or reach out to Ashish, he will help you with a PAD. It's NAMINC.org. I have that link in the chat box. And now we're going to wrap up the interview portion of our show. Thank you so much to all of our guests for sharing your expertise, your insights, and your time with us. This has been a great panel, and I really appreciate you. I also want to give a big shout out to those working behind the scenes tonight. Mental health intern Patience Greg, who's been putting all kinds of good information in the chat box. Psychiatric nurse Gail Pruitt, who's here with us most weeks and also contributes so much. Shout out to bensound.com for our awesome ukulele intro music. And now let's check out this video of the week. it just seemed very silly and fitting to our show. Our video of the week is a light spot. It helps us to just take a deep breath and relax in the middle of these tough conversations. So let's check this out.
Okay, so you're gonna hear a lot of things tonight, but what we're gonna talk about here is actually one of the most important things about being a volunteer. We hope that you remember everything we tell you, but if you're gonna pick just one thing, this is it. Okay. How to avoid being eaten by a hippo.
Wait a minute, Greg, no, that's not right.
What? What's wrong?
Well, she asked you to talk about Hipaa.
Right, you know, Hipaa. It's short for hippopotamus.
No, that's not right. Let me see if I can explain this to you somehow. Oh, look, a guitar. Let me see if I. This is a little something we like to call the Hipaa song. H is for health, I is for insurance, P is portability, and A accountability. HIPAA protects the patients, it keeps their info safe, it ensures that what you see here does not leave this place.
Oh, I think I get it.
So that's a volunteer training somewhere on HIPAA, and I hope you all enjoyed that profound performance as much as I did. All right, it is time to take your questions, virtual studio audience members. Please type them in the Q&A box, and our wise experts will respond to you just as soon as we can. We've got 4 in the queue, which is a great start. How many healthcare providers have been called out for violations on the HIPAA privacy rule, and what is the punishments? Michael, that has your name on it.
There were, I mean, in 2020, it was, I don't know if it was a record, but it was the biggest number in a while. And I think there were 19 settlements with OCR and providers. I think that number's right. I know it was a really low number, and it was in HHS put out, not a press release, but a piece on their website about how, you know, they've really taken enforcement seriously and stepped it up. So my point is, there aren't that many, and there's a massive backlog of complaints for violations versus actual violations, both under active investigation from the Office of Civil Rights and HHS, and ones that are actually levied some sort of fine. And one important thing for any providers on here to keep in mind, and I hope you already know this, is that it's usually your employer, not the clinician, the provider, who is levied a fine by the government, because there's just not a history, or as far as history indicates, an intent on behalf of the federal government to go after providers for violating HIPAA.
Thank you. Any follow-up?
And sorry, and the answer for the fines is you can go up to I think $1.5 million total, but it's as small as $100 per violation and as much as $25,000 per violation. So if the federal government does decide that they want to come after someone, they can rack up those $25,000 violations pretty quickly and punish a hospital if they want to, but they have to actually do that and enforce the law. So sorry, that's the full answer.
Thank you for that. I was reading up on HIPAA violations and what constitutes a violation. One of the examples was employees talking in a common area about a patient, a common space where they could easily be overheard. And I thought, wow, I've worked at places and I've witnessed that many times, actually. Pam or Gabe, before we move to another question, do you have a thought you'd like to share?
I don't want to jump on top of Pam. Pam, did you have something to share? One of the things that's interesting in what you said, Michael, is that there's this backlog of complaints. And I think that it is important to point out that that means there's a patient that feels violated, that somebody broke the law on their behalf, and the federal government, I mean, this is a law designed to protect patients, and even in your own answer, you sort of showed the disdain that anybody has to investigate this. Now, I understand, and I'm not trying to like fall down a But as patients, we kind of see this, we're like, they're talking about us. And even when we file a complaint, nobody cares if they even bother to investigate. This starts to build up in the patient's mind after time that nobody's looking out for us. And I recognize that that's not exactly what's happening here, but to many of us who have been traumatized and feel vulnerable, it looks like we don't have any protection because we can't even get a basic complaint investigated.
Yeah, and this is NAMI, North Carolina. So let me make a college basketball analogy. In the world of college basketball, sports fans know that most of the big programs are breaking some of the rules when it comes to recruiting players and maintaining players. It's just something that sports fans know, because there's been enough. Every time that someone digs into it, they find evidence, if not proof. But the NCAA has a very small number of investigators to investigate hundreds of programs. And so you might make a complaint, there might be some evidence out there, but they're never going to get to it unless it's a really big one. And that's basketball. When it comes to Hipaa, as Gabe said, this is people's lives. This is their privacy, their personal health information. So same logic applies, but this is people's lives and their medical information, their peace of mind.
Very sobering comments. All right, next question. Does a psychiatric advance directive override Hipaa? I could explain a little more what I meant by bringing that up. Hipaa comes into play when the doctor doesn't know who you want to see sometimes, or who you do want to see if you're hospitalized. A psychiatric advance directive can just clear up that question immediately. In terms of the emergency provisions, I don't think it would come into play. Michael?
If that, and I'll say again, I'm not an expert on advanced directives. I have a basic knowledge of them from when I worked for NAMI state affiliate years ago. But if that, as I understand, if it named a personal representative, that would be the end of the story there, because you can designate a personal representative to receive your PHI, your personal information under the privacy rule, and that's the one sentence version of the privacy rule is that that providers can only disclose your information to you, the patient, or to your personal representative, unless you meet one of its exceptions. So I don't well, it's not a legal opinion. That's just common sense there that it would, if you name a personal representative, then you'd be fine. Well, then the doctor would be fine disclosing to them if that's preordained. I bet we have some people in the comment here who know a lot more about those things than I do.
It's interesting. I want to say, Michael, I have one. I have everything. Peg signed me up a long time ago. It was, he got a toaster. It was awesome. Sincerely, the first thing that I want to say is I don't want anybody not to get one because I had a bad experience. I want to be very clear that they are good. So the answer to the question is they are supposed to, because I have designated my wife and my best friend as my people. I named two because my wife and I drive around a lot, and I had a lawyer do it and said, well, what if you and your wife are in, like, for example, a car accident, etc. So I have a second person, and that's supposed to work. I will say that the problem with it is they don't check a lot of times. And this is a chronic problem in healthcare where they're not checking for living wills. They're not checking for advanced directives. Forget about psychiatric advanced directives. So, like, staple it to your shirt. But it is supposed to absolutely unequivocally tell the doctor your wishes when you are of, quote, sound mind. So yes, the answer is yes, it is supposed to 100% override Hipaa if you name a person in your psychiatric advance directive. Make sure you tell those people that you have it and give them a copy of it.
I do know here in North Carolina, you actually file it with the Secretary of State's office online, and it is a firm legal document. But yeah, the people have to know that it's there. And I'm not sure how that works, but Ashish George, our policy director, will be happy to tell you all about that. Next question. Are you seeing more guardianship taking place today? I do not have an answer for that myself.
I
Any
don't have an
takers?
answer.
I mean, either.
Yeah, I don't have an answer. I could speak anecdotally, but it wouldn't be strong enough for me to. It'd just be people I talk to and not good data.
Thank you, Diane, for that question, though. That's an excellent,
Great
it
question.
would be a good thing to look into. All right, this next question. If the patient is clearly lacking insight that they are ill and unable to be their own care navigator once released from a hospital, it should be incumbent on the provider to not release that patient unless there is a competent adult to receive them and provide them with assistance for aftercare, just like for people with dementia or Alzheimer's disease. Family members should be informed when a patient is hospitalized and when they'll be discharged. If the individual wants someone else to be their caregiver, their care navigator who will agree, that should be the patient's choice. Discharge planning is key. Well, a lot of good information there.
If there's a second hippopotamus in the room, it's that when someone has anosognosia, good luck bringing them to the table to discuss their own course of treatment. At least at the moment. And I believe a couple of people mentioned that in the comments earlier too. That's maybe bigger than the scope of this discussion, but it's a big part of it, because not everyone who definitely has a severe mental illness is going to want to talk about it, because they don't, in some cases, believe they do.
Yeah.
This is where discharge planning is incredible, right? Like, listen to what we're saying. We're discharging somebody from psychiatric care who we also are discussing is not competent. Well, then what are we discharging them to? And the answer in some cases is to bus stops, to homeless camps. This is, I kind of agree with Michael that this isn't even a HIPAA problem anymore. This is, we're literally taking people who we all fully acknowledge cannot care for themselves and just turning them loose on the streets. We don't need to discuss HIPAA. We need to discuss common sense, and it's ridiculously awful. But to tie my point back, it is fascinating to me that we have this conversation where we both fully acknowledge that somebody is incompetent, but we have them sign their own discharge paperwork because we're letting them go. And this is a rampant issue, and we could spend a whole nother show, Peg, talking about this. I recommend another NAMI with Thursdays on why we release people who are not well to nobody.
All right, well, let's have a talk and get out our date books a little later. How's that sound? Interesting question from Diane Chrysanda. If you could make one change in HIPAA, what would that be? Similar to the one I asked at the end of our interview, I guess.
See, I go pie in the sky, and I always answer these questions incorrectly and make people like annoyed, but I would go pie in the sky. I wish that everybody was forced to discuss this when they were well. I wish that this was, I wish we just sat everybody down and said, look, at some point you might get sick, you might get in a car accident, you might have a mental health issue. You need to understand this, because when it impacts you, it's really going to impact you. It's like a fire drill, right? We all lined up in school for a building that was never going to catch on fire, just in case it might. And that saves lives. We never want to discuss this stuff until crisis hits. And then we expect people that don't understand it themselves to navigate it for their loved one. So I would make it mandatory for everybody to learn about HIPAA when they don't even need it, just in case. It would be like a HIPAA drill. I know that's ridiculous, but that's what I would do.
You know, if we had the political will, it would not be ridiculous. We do it with other occasions. We do it with other areas. And you're right. And I think you made the comment to me once, Gabe, it's so hard when I'm feeling well to want to sit down and do this. I don't have that much time when I'm feeling well, but it's really important. Pam, Michael, thoughts?
I agree with Gabe. Have the conversation when the persons are well. You know, start early. You know, education is power.
Still, so a couple of things. One, absolutely, everything they just said. But you're still gonna have the issue with the patients with anosognosia. that will still be an issue in some cases. Overall, with the HIPAA privacy rule, when Congress passed HIPAA, they left HHS so much discretion and very little guidance on what on earth this privacy rule is even supposed to be, that it's within the power of that federal agency to change it quite a bit. And they could change the language to encourage collaborative conversations when it's in the patient's best interest, as opposed to discourage it. That is, talk about political will, pie in the sky. But that would help everyone. That would help everyone. And it would even play into the scenario that you, Gabe, and you, Pam, were just talking about, where talk about it when you're well, okay, but still, the way the privacy rule is currently written, providers will be scared to share information. So if it's about having productive, cooperative conversations between providers and families, there could be some fairly radical changes to the wording of the law. To share information. So if it's about having productive, cooperative.
I hear an echo.
Yeah.
Wise words. They deserve to be promoted. It occurs to me that we should share the meaning of anosognosia. Who would like to do that? Since we've been discussing it. It's not a word everybody knows.
You said lack of insight.
Right. So I'm really ill. I'm talking to friends who nobody else can see. I don't know how to take care of myself, but I'm not sick. I don't need help. You need help.
It's the way I explain it to, say, a state legislator who knows nothing about mental illness. I say it's, you're a person who does not have schizophrenia. And for me to say you have schizophrenia, you say, no, I don't, because you honestly know that you don't. That is the same as talking to a patient who has schizophrenia, who objectively has the illness and anosognosia. It is a lack of insight into one's own illness.
Right. All right. Thank you for that definition. And so this is another data type question. How many lawsuits have been filed by plaintiffs against doctors for not sharing information? I don't know. Maybe Google would have the answer to that, unless somebody here does.
I don't know. Off the top of my head, I don't know. It's an interesting question because, again, that was a much bigger part of the congressional intent of HIPAA in the 90s than what we have today in reality. I don't know. And I'm gonna look into that. Did Janet Hayes ask that question?
Yeah, she did. And I really do try to research these shows as much as I can. Yeah. So I sound semi-intelligent.
Because I can get back. We can, if I can find when I find an answer to that, we can share with everyone who is part of this event here, but I can also just reach out to Janet because she's a friend. So, but it's a great question. She always asks questions like that I don't know the answer to, and that's why I like her.
It is a great question, and I don't have the answer either. However, I did post some information with all the statistics about lawsuits that was done because of HIPAA violations, and you can find that on the Peer Support United Facebook page, and it's posted by my Facebook name, which is Pamela Goodine, Living by Faith.
All right, excellent source of information there. Interesting question from Terry Harris in the chat. Since there is so little prosecution, why are doctors so scared? Sometimes it feels like laziness to me.
Glad she said it so I didn't have to.
So
my thought was, you're not wrong.
And isn't that a shame, right? It's the example that I used earlier in the show about how HIPAA kind of gets a bad name sometimes because it's just being wielded as a sword to get parents off our back. The provider doesn't want to talk to you, but they say they can't. They're not legally allowed. And I think this cumbersomes the debate even further. When I talk to peers and I ask them what they think HIPAA is, they say it's the only thing that's protecting them from their employer not firing them. And they believe it. They're not making this up. They feel very strongly that if anything happens to HIPAA, that during a background check, their psychiatric condition, their bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, schizoaffective, that they've worked so hard to reach recovery with, can pop up in a standard background check that an employer pays $149 for. And this is a deep concern, especially for people that, you know, like me, where I was committed to a psychiatric hospital. I didn't work for 4 years. I fought so hard. And when I got my first job after all of that, I was so proud of it. And I lived in fear for when I got my first apartment that I needed that job to pay for. And I just lived in fear that somebody was going to find out that I had bipolar disorder and fire me. And I'd be homeless, uninsured, and I'd be right back to where I was before I got all that care. And this is what motivates peers on the internet to be so scared of like Michael, because that's what we're afraid of. And I do think that that gets missed a lot. We're not trying to be difficult, we're terrified. And I don't know how to get into the hands of my peers that that's not what's happening, any more than Michael knows how to explain that slight changes will be beneficial, probably more than they hurt. I'm sure that if Michael and I could figure it out, we just take over the world. But
Oh no, someone's got to put a stop to that.
yeah. But this is, people believe that Hipaa is only this privacy law that will allow this to come up on background checks. And in the world of Google, I understand why they're afraid of it. It's so simple. I can find out what people bought their house for a day after they bought it. Just, it's on Zillow, Zillow.com, what everybody paid for their house and more.
What, are they your sponsor? Okay.
Not yet.
Didn't go with Redfin or Realtor.com. None of those. Zillow is your. Sorry.
They gave me a lot of money.
Interesting questions. Thank you, Michael. When are we ever going to get the data of keeping our loved ones out of the revolving door? Oh my goodness, another big question, another future show.
Yeah, I don't know that that's a Hipaa problem.
It's bigger than, as big as Hipaa is, that's a much bigger question.
Yeah. And a very serious one. I want to be clear. I'm not. That one disturbs me almost more than the privacy. I just, if I could get well, but my privacy is broken, at least I have the advantage of being well. There are so many people I talk to that just, they're not even well and they can't get care, and they're desperate. They're desperate for care, and they're banging on doors. They're making appointments. Hipaa is not the biggest issue for peers. It's just the topic of this show.
Well, and it's something that one part of the federal government has chosen to prioritize recently. So there, you know, therefore it's
Right.
it's relevant.
Yeah.
But to your point, it's, as far as the revolving door, my God, that's it's one piece. It's a barrier. It's a barrier to effective treatment for mental illness, and all of those barriers contribute to the revolving door.
So the revolving door is in and out of hospitals? Is that what that refers to?
Gabe, do you want to, or Gabe
Yeah,
or Pam, do you want to?
It can also be in and out of the jails
Yep.
and the prisons.
It's a cycle of hospital, outpatient treatment, incarceration, or
Oh, and
or
homeless.
any two pieces. Yeah, homeless. I'm sorry. Thank you. Homelessness. Exactly. Yeah.
Got it.
Any one or more pieces of that you just keep cycling through a pattern of.
Got it.
You're
Okay, so I
sick,
knew that as the
somebody
cycle
does
of
something,
homelessness.
and you're sick again. I just, right? We want, you're sick, somebody does something, you're well. That would be what we want. What we end up with is you're sick, somebody does something, you're sick again, you do something, you're sick again, you do something. It always ends back at sick. And everybody's like, well, we did all this stuff for you. Must not be med compliant. It just never ends. There never seems to be wellness. It's just a circle of awful.
I think
Say
it's very important
something
that
positive,
we-
Peg.
I think Pam was about to.
I apologize.
Yeah, I was just listening to some of the language that we use at times. You know, I mentioned earlier, well, maybe not here, but somewhere I mentioned about being stigma busters. You know, there is power in the words that we use. Words can either break us or make us. And so, you know, I don't really like the word sick, you know, especially when we're talking about mental health, you know, a person is just not having a good day. You know, so I believe in using words that's going to empower the people, because, you know, they get that word in their head, I'm sick, I'm sick, I'm sick. Is that building them up or breaking them down? It's kind of keeping them stuck, if you ask me. And so let's just do better, everyone, with the language that we use with each other, with our colleagues, with our families, with our friends.
Yeah, so here's a question for y'all. What gives you hope? Let's start with Michael.
In the context of HIPAA privacy or
It is a little bit of a broad question. Of all the topics we've discussed, let's go with the revolving door.
that in the last decade or so, I mean, it's a broad time frame, there has finally been a lot of public policy and governmental discussion and some marginal reforms to address it. Finally, people meaning people who have the ability to change things are taking these issues, they're taking the revolving door seriously, knowing that this is a real problem and it's not going to go away if we don't talk about it. It's not going to go away if we underfund it, or if we just fund it. That there have to be real reforms if we want human beings, our friends, neighbors, and relatives, and a lot of people themselves, you know, not living on the streets, not in hospitals constantly, not incarcerated because of a mental illness that they can't help. So progress and discussion is good. That gives me hope, but that's not a solution. But it gives me hope that if we keep it going, these types of conversations like the one we're having right now going, that there will be real change.
I agree, there has been a lot of change on those levels. I also think in the long term, I grew up in an Irish Catholic family where we didn't talk about mental health. We barely talked about feelings. My mother had postpartum depression, anxiety. They gave her Valium when she was trying to raise 6 kids. So she just muddled through without any treatment and did her best. And when I think of the advantages I've had, medications are part of my treatment plan, and I've had lots of good help, and I've had NAMI and just so much support that she never had. So I think there are changes, but there's always so much work to be done too. Pam, Gabe, Pam, your thoughts?
There's a whole lot of different things that gives me hope personally. But working in this field, well, being a person in recovery, there's proof and evidence that recovery is possible. But what really gives me hope is when I reach that one person and they come and say, thank you so much for helping me. And they're doing well, and they begin helping other people.
Thank you. Gabe Borelli.
Hey, Pegasus. I didn't know if we were allowed to use our superhero names. Sincerely, one of the biggest things that gives me hope is seeing panels that are constructed like this. You know, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when I got involved in this, there was, you know, like a peer panel or a consumer panel that it was called. And then there was a doctor panel, and then there was a family member panel. And we were all so segregated. And whenever we would talk to each other, it wasn't a productive discussion. It was sort of an airing of grievances. And there was just a lot of trauma in the room, and it was so unfortunate, because even back then I thought, wow, we're missing the point. And by we, I mean all of us, myself included. And you know, now fast forward, we're getting a lot better at, you know, okay, we've got Michael, we've got Pamela, we've got Gabe, and we're approaching this very differently. I mean, vastly differently. And we haven't yelled at each other. We're not mad. We all respect each other. And we've discussed a bunch of points, conceded some, have a better understanding of others. It gives me hope, because, listen, if every single person that cares about mental health advocacy suddenly agrees, we're still such a small group. And when we're fractured, we're an even tinier group. So it would behoove us if we want to see real change on the national level and in the societal level and the federal level and the political level, if we found the things that we agree on and start moving forward, or at the very least, discussed these things respectfully and appropriately to get all ideas out. And I'm seeing that more and more. And in fact, I'm seeing it so often, it has become commonplace. And whenever I see just a family member panel or a peer panel, I actually think, wow, when was the last time you saw that? That gives me a tremendous amount of hope.
All right. Well, those are wonderful answers. I'm not seeing questions in the Q&A box. I'm going to make some quick announcements. And panelists, if you have closing statements, you might want to think about those. Next week, we've got Stop the Hate, Violence Against Asian Americans. We'll have another psychiatric nurse and a Duke speaker, a Duke student who's studying ministry and divinity. So awesome show next week on the 22nd. Stop the Hate, Violence Against Asian Americans. It's been on the increase and it's completely unacceptable. I also want to ask you, please fill out our survey when you leave your Zoom show. It should appear on your screen, the opportunity to give feedback to our awesome panelists, and we'd love to have your input. It helps us improve over time, and it helps us show our funders what we do. This evening has flown by. If you have one more question, virtual studio audience, you can give it to us. Otherwise, panelists, do you have any closing thoughts?
I would just say it was a great experience being a panelist with Gabe as well as Michael. And I thank you for the input and experience that you shared. And I just wish everybody great success. Keep doing what you're doing to help our people.
Thank you, Pam.
And go again, thank you, Peg and NAMI North Carolina for hosting this and for inviting all of us to be here. This has been great. The only rubric I have for these types of events we all do so many of during the pandemic virtually is that I learned something, and I certainly have. So more than one thing, and it's because of everyone, Gabe, Pamela, but also Peg. I mean, everyone who's spoken and all the people who have asked questions. So this has been insightful for everyone, including the panelists. And thank you again for having me and for thanking the Treatment Advocacy Center.
Thank you so much, Peg, for putting this together in NAMI, North Carolina. I want to tell a little story about when I first met Peg, like ever so long ago. It was just a couple of years, not the 10 that I think it actually was. I was a board member of a NAMI, and there was a consumer council spot, and the consumer council representative was the seat that I held, and it was a non-voting seat. And we worked on that. We're like, hey, we've got to get this voting. We worked with the executive director. We worked with the other people, and it took a while. We had to examine it, change laws. Boards moved slowly. It wasn't the number one thing, even though it was my number one thing. But right before I left, literally at my last board meeting, it happened. The consumer council representative became a voting seat, and I was thrilled. And Peg took my spot. Now, not took it. I was retiring off the board, and Peg got my spot. And I'm a bit of a sarcastic person, and I gave the little speech that you're supposed to do in the board, and I said, I've been on the board for 3 years. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here. And one of the things you're supposed to say is your greatest accomplishment. And I said that I felt that my greatest accomplishment was making the consumer council rep seat a voting seat. And I wish Peg the best of luck. And then, because I'm sarcastic, I said, well, assuming that she votes the way that I would vote. And everybody laughed. So I walk off the stage, and somebody walks over to me and says, is that serious? Will you be upset if Peg disagrees with you? And I said, no, that was like a total joke. Is that not obvious? And a couple of people said, no, that's not. It sounded like you might actually be upset if Peg disagreed with you. Now, I want to be very clear. I'm just sarcastic, and the joke apparently did not land. But what I said is no. Anybody that has that seat, I want to be able to give their opinion and their work. And if they disagree with me, so be it. I tell that story because I think that sometimes we get caught up in the you have to agree with me because you're like me, or we can't respect each other unless we all agree. I kind of don't subscribe to that, because the coolest people I know disagree with half of what I say, which means that I disagree with half of what they say. And those are the best and most fruitful conversations. And I know this is hard and very emotional and very traumatic, but I think that mental health advocacy will move forward a lot faster if we can find a way to state our opinions respectfully and respect the other people that are just so desperately trying to get their viewpoint heard. Now, I have no idea how Peg voted. They wouldn't give me the records. I tried to check. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't try to check it all. But sincerely, I do think that that's one of my greatest accomplishments for my time on that board. It's something that I worked very hard on, and it's still a voting seat to this day, and it set the standard across the charity that was for. And I'm very proud of that. But no, I would not be less proud if I found out that every single member disagreed with me. I think that that would be okay, because it meant that somebody like me got to vote. And that's what I'm trying to focus on. And I think that that is common ground for us all. We're all just trying to make life better for ourselves and for our loved ones. And I think we really need to hang our hat on that more than the disagreement sometimes. That said, state your opinion loudly, even if your voice shakes.
All right. Well, thank you to all of our awesome panelists. You all have been great at sharing your knowledge and your expertise, very articulate. And I know you've all made changes in the world, more than we know here tonight, but I want to thank you for that. And so, wow, another evening has flown by. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. In the week ahead, don't forget to join us next week. In the week ahead, go where you need to go, do what you need to do, and be safe. Have a good night, everyone.
Go to the desert? What
yes,
happened?
I'm going where I need to go to be safe.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Night.
everyone.
Have a good one.